The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind, the Tathagata. Today is the second day of this November 2023 7-day sesshin at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. Back when I was just at the end of my teenage years, I would get aghast because it seemed like I would latch on to anger and continue to revolve it, reframe it, revise it, edit it, and keep it going for weeks on end for one silly little incident. It was devastating, really. This was way before I started Zazen. It was about 13 years, I think, before I started sitting. And of course, now I realize that I had learned that because there was someone in our family who that was their modus operandi. They would hang on to anger, feelings that they've been cheated, and so on. And this is how people learn. This is how one way people get conditioned, by being around people who are caught in stuff and acting out. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha millennia ago, 2.5 millennia ago, cautioned people who were serious about spiritual practice to be careful about who their friends were, so that they would be exposed to positive experiences, positive modes of behavior, because that's how we learn, by emulating those around us. And it doesn't matter whether it was, for example, in the geography class in high school, where I had to have one more class. It was my senior year, and I had to have one more class. And the only class, since they wouldn't allow me to take mechanical drawing, was that interested me at all, was geography. Unfortunately, little did I know that it was the easy class that the ones who really didn't want to work chose. And it was extremely hard pulling upstream from that way of being in that class. I'd always been a very high achieving student all the way from the very beginning. When I was in first grade in Canada, we had spelling books. And one day the principal called me out and took me up to a 6th grade class and handed me a book and said, read. And I read it out loud because it was easy for me to do. And part of that is because I'm sure that I remembered how to read. Also, I was quite visual, so looking at the spelling words, it was easy to get 100 on the weekly tests and excel in reading and spelling. But of course, that doesn't help when I'm 19 years old and hanging on to anger. Let me share with you something written by Martine Batchelor, who was a nun in a Korean Buddhist monastery in Korea. And it'll give you a little bit of insight into what can happen. I wonder if we can put this around here.
Sure.
Because then I can...
You want it on the back?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. My domestic responsibility for the duration of that retreat, and I'm sorry I'm not able to read very fast because I just can't see very well, was to clean the communal bathroom. I would do this at 4 o'clock every afternoon. At the very same time, though, another nun would appear and proceed to wash herself before performing an afternoon ceremony, at which she had to officiate. This went on for several days and weeks, and I began to feel extremely resentful. Then one day, I went down at 4 o'clock, and it suddenly didn't matter anymore that she would then be there washing herself. It's kind of hard to clean a bathroom when somebody's using it. It was my time to clean and her time to wash. How wonderful it felt to be free of resentment. Although a small incident, it was somehow very meaningful to me. It showed that meditation worked quite quietly. Without my intentional forcing any changes, it dissolved the grasping and attachment that gave rise to the irritation. When we have a practice like Zen meditation, and we get a chance to experience these things, and enough meditation goes by where we begin to see something a little deeper, and without realizing it, we become able to begin to let go. Sometimes there's a lot of processing we have to do, because if there are things, for example, from our history that were quite traumatizing, then it definitely takes time. And I had my fill of that, and did many, many years of psychotherapy to work on that as well. But it is possible to be free. It is quite possible to be free. Martine Batchelor hadn't been there that long, but she was in a monastic setting where she was doing a lot of meditation, and continues to do so. And this is decades later. She eventually married Stephen Batchelor, who at the time was a monk there, and eventually the two of them got married and moved back to England, where he was from. She's French. Let me share a few other things. It is interesting how we freeze our view of particular people. We exaggerate certain characteristics, certain aspects we see in others, thereby freezing them into narrow, unproductive categories or relationships. And we limit our ability to feel close and act out of a sense of intimacy. We lock them into certain patterns of behavior. And then, because we see these attitudes as solid, influence either to influence others to stay in those patterns. This person is just ... And it comes because, well, pretty much this is how humans work. We're taught that. We're taught to take sides. We're taught to think somebody is X, Y, or Z. And that also is often influenced, usually influenced by our surroundings. if we're with a group of people that has a negative view towards a certain other group of people, and this is sort of the basis of the whole racial strife that we've been experiencing for so many centuries, really. Somehow it seems that human beings have to have a pecking order, and they have to be at the top of it in order to feel secure. But not feeling secure enough, they have to keep other people down. It's a very sad state of affairs and not really fair. When we freeze people into they're this or they're that, we actually prevent them from being anything else. Because right away, as soon as we interact with them, it's from a perspective of we think they're thus. And they don't have a chance to be anything but thus, because we're so fixed in our ideas about it. This actually is one of the deeper meanings of not to kill, the first precept. We all do it. We've all learned to do it from childhood. And then particularly as we get closer into teenagehood and into teenagehood, cliques form, and it's always for and against. And there's always a changing population. Sometimes you're in with the in-group, sometimes you're out, not part of the in-group. And it's a cause of great suffering to people growing up, and also to people who are adults. But through the long maturation that is so important in Zen practice, we learn gradually to see it differently. And this is extremely important in terms of our being able to experience that innate freedom that is our birthright. Let me share a few other things. This is something that Mitra-roshi, abbot of Sogenji, said. To not be attached to anything whatsoever, to not add on to one's direct perception second associations and third associations. Don't hold on to any idea about how hard you are working. That is all extraneous, extra. To sit and not be caught on any idea of sitting, any ideas of doing it, any ideas of doing anything. That is what makes it so difficult, those ideas. And Georgia O'Keeffe said something very perceptive about how we can drop out of that. She said, if you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it is your world for the moment. It is your entire world for the moment. If you're that focused on it, that present with it, then any idea of pretty or ugly, or whether it's a weed or a wonderful garden flower, it's just not there. You can't do that and be fully present with that flower. And this extends to all kinds of things. Fully present with our sitting, our zazen. And to that end, I'd like to share some writings. Our good friend and neighbor Richard Holland, who lives two doors down basically, is half hermit and half state executive. These days, he's almost all hermit. He's in his, actually he's 81, and has had a number of physical they're known as accidents, I believe, in the medical field. A couple of strokes, a near heart attack. He was never one to want to do much in the way of movement or exercise. He, at one point, when he was out of high school, having had a number of very, very challenging, painful experiences when he was 10, 11 years old, when his oldest brother, who was just a couple years older, was killed by a drunk driver after an angry fight with his mother about whether he could go to a movie or not. And he insisted he was going and hopped on his bike and took off and died. And then the mother was so distraught by that she had a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized for a period of time. His father had to deal with, they have 4 boys and 3 girls. The youngest girls were toddlers and infants. And so he farmed the girls out to neighbors to take care of, and took care of the boys. One of the girls, the youngest, no, actually, I think I learned recently it was the second youngest, almost died of pneumonia. She still has the scar from the tracheotomy. And so these things happened, boom, 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 when he was 10, 11 years old. And they definitely registered. And then his mom came back, and eventually they grew up. And the youngest brother, Philip, went off to Nepal to be in the Peace Corps. The family was always into generosity, sharing. They were Third Order Benedictines, actually, so they kept the prayer cycle all day long at their prescribed times and were quite spiritually motivated. But Philip never came home except in a box. He got encephalitis while he was there. And he had been such a wonderful human being that the doctor who treated him flew all the way back from Nepal to the United States to let his parents know personally what had happened. When I met Richard, it was not long after that, and he was, at that point, working for the state of New Mexico. He always went back to the work for the state when he needed some money, dental work or whatever. And he actually fell into high positions. But he also had been in the war in Vietnam, not in the military, but as a conscientious objector. So he was trained in Vietnamese language and sent over to be a village advisor. He was there during the Tet Offensive, and one of the times when I was early in my friendship with him, he invited us over to dinner and showed some slides of that period of time. Big trucks piled 6 feet high with bodies. Devastation everywhere. And he came back with PTSD, but it was undiagnosed. And the best he could do with it, he was married at the time, and was going to graduate school, and it just got to be too much for him. And one night, he threw his sleeping bag in his car and left and just kept driving. He and his ex-wife are still friends, and she eventually married someone else. But he's always had his challenges, which is why he prefers to live alone in a very quiet place, remote place, and not interact very much. So he periodically will close his gates, actually put a barbed wire across his driveway, the 2 entrances to his driveway, and just sit for a long, extended period, kind of like a 100 days retreat over the winter. And sometimes he'll write, because he actually was an English major, focusing on Shakespeare when he went to undergraduate school. And here are some of the things he has written. The mind squirms and flops about, seeking for a problem that it can solve. No falta nada. The restless mind flails weakly out further afield, stirring up past and future, all and nothing. No particular dimensions. No falta nada. The mind vehemently insists that intervals are dimensional problems, in other words, measurable, or absolutely, either or. Thank you very much. No falta nada. No falta nada, literally. No lack, nothing, including dimensions, including no dimensions. And then he shares, I think it's a Rumi poem. The real truth of existence is sealed until after many twists and turns of the road. But that knowing depends on the time spent looking. That's from a book called In Baghdad, Dreaming of Cairo, In Cairo, Dreaming of Baghdad, by Rumi and translated by Coleman Barks. Then he says, he also writes, certainly plenty of opportunities on some days now to observe the mind grabbing at third positions, creating and bouncing off extremes, more active, no passive, more meditation, no, more exercise, more freedom, more discipline, more food, no less, more this, more that, more winds singing in the trees. And then he writes, listen. He really means listen. Walk into the forest. The winds blow where they will. See. Look out on the village. What begins ends. Study snowflakes with a magnifying glass. Taste the falling snow itself. Melt. This is the other side of the mountain. Listen to this rock. Sit on this cushion. No position. Walk to the outhouse. No position. Deo gratias. He had studied Latin for 5 years, I think, because he was going to become a Trappist monk. Pick up the backpack. The high mountain aspens call. Listen. Be silent. And that's the key. We are so surrounded by distraction, more and more as the years go by. When I was a kid, there wasn't so much. There was still challenge. But I remember in those days, we always walked to school, and there were no school buses. Schools were fairly close, so you could walk. They hadn't begun consolidation of school districts yet. And anyway, we lived in a small town in Canada. And I used to love to walk. You ordinarily went straight out of the house, down to a certain point, a few blocks away, and then turned right and went straight, and you got to the school. But then there was the opportunity to go on the hypotenuse, which was a gully. And we were warned not to do that because that's where the bears were. And it was, in hindsight, I can see why, because there were apple trees in the gully. And in the springtime, it was so wonderful just to walk through the gully and smell the apple trees and see the apple blossoms. It was just glorious. Because in those days, we didn't have a lot of distractions, and we could just see, just feel, just hear. But then eventually we moved back to the States, and it was more busy. We lived in Youngstown, Ohio first, still walking to school. And then we lived in Cleveland Heights, which was more busy, still walking to school, which was great because you could do that safely in those days. Nowadays, you're likely to get snatched, unfortunately. So one more worry to be concerned about. And my brother and I used to clip on our roller skates and roller skate to school. That was so much fun. And we got some good exercise. And we weren't thinking about anything. It's just the feeling of skating along. But then we moved to East Chicago. Again, a big city, bigger city. And other things happened. I was suddenly in an inner city high school for junior high. I was junior high and high school. And had some really interesting classes like physiology and drama. But walking home was a little bit more fraught with danger. And my brother, who was in a different school, where the teacher would get so upset he'd throw ink bottles at the students, would meet and walk home together. And one day we were walking home, and three big guys, they were probably truant from high school, maybe they were beyond that. And they had a bicycle tire, which they'd probably stolen. And they started hitting my brother over the head with it, at which I lost it, quite literally saw red, and started furiously climbing up this big guy who was not the one that was doing the bicycle maneuver, but it was such a shock to them, I think, to have this little girl. I was in 7th grade, but I wasn't that big, fighting them, that they stopped and went away. And that caused our parents to decide to move out of the area. So once again, another new school, and then another new school after that. But there were no computers yet. And in fact, the telephone system in that small town that we had moved to, the outskirts of, you had to pick up the phone. There were no dial phones. You had to pick up the phone, and the operator would say, "Operator," and then you would say, give the telephone number, which was only 4 numbers. Our telephone number was Crown Point 1717. But then it got busier. Eventually, some years later, I was in Turkey after living in a number of other countries, and computers had started being used. Not personal computers, but one of my Turkish friends offered to teach me punch cards. And I thanked her and said, no, I didn't think I would ever see a situation where I would use a punch card or a computer either. Well, here I am facing one. And of course I had to learn, been at it for, decades at this point. And then we had car phones. And then we had cell phones. But before that, we had TV. And my grandfather, who was a wholesale hardware salesman, had a TV, which I'm sure he was able to get at cost. And so when we were living with our grandparents there, while my parents were building a house in Cleveland, we had a little bit of programming. There was not much. I remember something at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which was a ballet performance. It was, of course, black and white. And then in the evening, we could watch Howdy Doody or The Lone Ranger or some cowboy in white. I can't remember who. And there began to be radio dramas as well. I was a spy for the FBI, and that is at the Green something or other. I don't remember what it was. All guaranteed to terrify you and keep the fear of communist infiltration and attack live in your mind. Then we had cell phones, which we could carry with us all the time and be called at any hour of day or night. And initially it was pretty limited to cities, but now we live out in the middle of nowhere, basically, and we can use our cell phones here. Television got much more complex. It was 24-hour programming. There was a lot of violence on TV because people's ability to handle it just grew exponentially. And the producers had to produce more violent programs in order to keep us entertained. Our threshold of ability to handle these things just dropped, unfortunately. And then it began to be, to spread out. That behavior began to spread out into the culture. Now we have, what is it called? The reality glasses that you can put on anything you want to put on. They have a good use, and all of these things have positive attributes. The reality thing has been used a lot in helping traumatized people. And now there's AI, which can produce fake anything. Songs that supposedly are created by well-known songwriters and singers, and they can mimic exactly what they sound like, only it's fake song. And the same way with movies, the same way with videos, the same way with things on any of the social media sites. So it's getting harder and harder to discern what is accurate and what is not. So our mind is constantly drawn outside to judgment, to puzzlement, to fear, anger, sadness, delusion, in just everywhere. And yet, we have the capacity, if we can untrain ourselves from that extreme busyness, to reach a I call it a deep river of peace running through us. We don't have to be whipped around by circumstance. We can begin to free ourselves of our traumatic memories. We can begin to live much less stressed through Zazen. But the reason why the mind squirms and flips and flops is because we are so habituated to bouncing around among subjects and ideas and just plain yada yada. So this is why it's so difficult to do Zazen in the early years. Persisting, pulling the mind back to the extended out breath, pulling the mind back again to the extended out breath. It was no joke that when I first started practicing and was taught to count my breaths 1 through 10, and you'd find yourself at 75, somehow jumping from 2 to 75, or just doing it all mindlessly, and it was really hard. You'd think that you'd be able to count from 1 to 10 without a problem, but it was quite a challenge with so many things pulling at you for attention. But as you continue, gradually, what is pulling you for attention begins to settle down. It takes time. It takes time. That's why when Rumi said, the time depends on how long you spend looking. In other words, how long you spend watching the breath, experiencing the sensations in your body as you breathe out and in, and you gradually become more aware, both of what you're dealing with inside, as well as what's outside. And you get going far enough along, you begin to have moments of peace, moments of deep quiet, alternating, of course, with moments of remembering painful experiences in your life or insights into your own painful behavior. And then, as has been said so many times, you have an opportunity to tune in and feel it so fully that it begins to let go. That one tuning in, that first tuning in, will weaken it to the point where when it comes up again, it will be weaker. It'll be easier to let it go sooner and more deeply. And it may come up 2, 3, 4 times, and then it just won't come up again because it has died on the vine, because you've given it really no overt attention. The attention you've been giving it has been visceral, not thoughts or stories. And gradually, over the years, we become more and more free. But those early years are really challenging. And in some ways, the degree to which they're challenged, if we persist, can predict how free we can become. So in a sense, the more difficult the early practice is, the greater the potential for deep awakening if we persist. We're not accustomed to this kind of work until we've been at it for a while. And then we begin to see positive results, even a flash of peace. It becomes more rewarding. We realize that we can change, we can experience increasing freedom. So it's important to keep on. Not to go halfway up the mountain or a quarter of the way up the mountain and take in the view and stop there. which is what a lot of people do, unfortunately. Very, very few people have the commitment and the dedication to go all the way to the top of that mountain, all the way deeply into letting go, sufficiently to be truly free. That is our potential. What we make of it is up to us. There's going to be plenty of times when you want to do anything else but. I was saying to someone recently how in my first years of practice, I kept thinking, this coming weekend, I'm going to leave for the weekend. I still owned a house in Washington, D.C., and I could make the excuse that I had to go down there and check it out. And in fact, I really did have to go down there and do some repairs on it. But it was so funny that every time I thought, this weekend I'm going to leave. I'm going to get out of this set of incredible constraints. And something would always come up, a ceremony or something that would prevent me from leaving. It happened so many times, it actually became laughable when I quit thinking about leaving. When I was first at the Rochester Zen Center, I was so amazed that there are people who could stick it out for 2 whole years. But I did. And I'm so grateful. And I know that you listening to this Teisho can also do it. And again, what you put into it is what you'll get out of it. If you really are willing to slog through the wet cement, to struggle through the jungle. I recently saw a photograph of a Colombian family. The father actually sitting on a log, his mud up to his knees, and his 5-year-old daughter looking at him with trust and love. He carried her through this extreme part of the jungle in order to get to freedom. He made it. Plenty of people didn't. Plenty of people won't. And what he had to go through to get there really was experiences that would stop most people. So be heartened. It's difficult in the early years, but as you keep working with dedication and also frequently enough, like Rumi said, how soon you get there, it depends on how long you look, or how deep you get, depends on how long you look. And if you do frequent practice, everyday practice, the more you can do every day, within reason. I mean, if you're here at the center, at Mountain Gate, you've got a lot of opportunities to do practice. You're required to sit at least an hour twice a day when we're out of sesshin, and then we have frequent sesshin, where we sit many hours of the day. And everyone is encouraged to sit more than that, because the more you can sit, the deeper you will go, and the sooner you will begin to taste that innate freedom. If you just sit once in a while, it's not gonna get you there very fast, and you're likely to give up before you even reach any results. But if you can sit every single day, at least an hour, in around your work in the outside world, and then even more if you can, taking into consideration your family life and not short-sheeting them, but integrating your meditation on the cushion and also your presence when you are out and about and working and have a family. You have not so much time to actually do sitting zazen, but you do have infinite opportunities, 24 hours, in which to pay increasing attention, to become increasingly aware of each moment, not outwardly, but inwardly. Pick up that flower, dissolve into it. When you're driving to work, if you drive to work, or biking to work, whatever it is, feel that experience. Don't let your mind wander about. An unfortunate friend of mine who lived in Cerrillos, the Little Hills, a small country town not so far from Santa Fe. You can see those hills from Santa Fe. And there's a train that runs through town, I think twice a day, once coming, once going. The train is supposed to go only 40 miles an hour through the town. He was heading to work. His daughter had just been born. I think she was 3 weeks old or something. And his mind was distracted. And as he crossed the tracks, a train hit him through the car 160 feet. So I'm not sure they were actually going 40 miles an hour. And he died instantly. Paying attention can actually save our lives. But more than that, it saves our life in a different way. It opens us to the richness, the peace, the joy, the harmony that is always there, even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of painful experiences. So, the handwriting's on the wall, everyone. All you have to do is do it. And yes, it's difficult in the early years, but the rewards will be incredible. Nothing short of true freedom. Thank you for listening. I'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.